Georgia lawmakers racing the clock to pass bills that impact families statewide. Republicans tell Atlanta News First some bills are getting blocked unless lawmakers pick a side in the governor's race. Atlanta News First Abby Casoris reports.
Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones is running the Senate while running for governor. Republican lawmakers tell me that those two roles are colliding. It has consequences for the bills they're trying to pass. This week we watched as Jones met with lawmakers who haven't endorsed anyone. Republican sources tell us he's pushing for endorsements. We saw bills reassigned late in session, moves lawmakers say can help or choke legislation.
Mr. President, that was an unusually large number of motions to withdraw and commit. I didn't think the Committee on Assignments made mistakes.
Representative Stephen Sines says his bipartisan K-9 bill passed unanimously in the House and then stalled with no explanation. He suspects it's tied to his endorsement of Jones's rival, Rick Jackson.
I would say that the timing is conspicuous to lead someone to that conclusion if they would want to.
Representative Brent Cox, also backing Jackson, says his NIL bill was sent to a committee with no chairman, freezing it. At a press event in LaGrange, Jackson says more than a dozen lawmakers told him they're afraid to even be seen talking to him.
There's people in the House that are afraid to endorse me because they're afraid their bill.
Jones's campaign fired back in a statement, calling Jackson's claims an excuse, saying, bless his heart, what a precious way to explain not having many endorsements, pointing out Jones has support in every corner of the state, including President Donald Trump. Lawmakers tell us while the campaigns trade punches, bills sit still, and so do their constituents' priorities. With days left, the stakes keep on rising, and there are rumblings that the state's budget could be dragged into this. If the House and the Senate can't agree, members from both parties tell me that they fear they could go into a special session. At the state capitol, I'm Abby Casoris.